This is Illuminate, the podcast about men with good hearts, open minds, and a desire to make the world better. Welcome to Illuminate. I'm your host, Chris Tidrick, and I'm here with Mike B. Mike is a Central Illinois resident where he lives with his wife. They spend their free time birding, traveling, and nerding out with games and Star Wars. Mike started and serves as executive director of a nonprofit that does security-sensitive work serving people all over the U.S. He is also a pilot and flight instructor in their free time. Mike uses he and they pronouns. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation. You and I have known each other for quite a while, but I really have no idea where this conversation is going to go. So I'm interested to see how you tell your story and how you answer all these questions. So let's jump right into the first question. I always start the conversation talking about motivation and purpose. And so what's your why? Where do you find purpose and what drives you?
So I think it comes really from two different things. So first, it comes from kind of a sense of being raised in a Christian environment where, at least was supposed to be about helping others, looking out for others, and not about yourself and things. But really how that plays out today is how my relationship with my wife is that it really, a lot of things in my life are driven by my wife, whether it be making sure that we have a quality relationship with really strong communication and good ways to work together, but also, the work that I do every day is because of things that she introduced me to, or she encouraged me to look into or participate in that, I might have done it on my own, but I definitely wouldn't have done it on the timeline that she's enabled me to do it. And so really, it was all that. And really what I do today in my day-to-day work is a result of an anti-racism workshop that she actually encouraged me to do that she had already done. This was in 2020 after George Floyd's murder. We were just frustrated by protesting, voting, donating, just didn't feel like it was accomplishing anything. Because in particular around that issue, Black men were still being killed by police. And so this anti-racism workshop really was my first exposure to anti-racism. I'd heard the term a few times, and 2020 is probably when it kind of became more common amongst white folks. I'm sure other people were talking about it before that, but maybe it got into the consciousness for white folks in 2020. And that's really what shapes my activism today and the work that I do today.
Fantastic. So let's talk about your journey. You go back as far as you'd like, but I'd love to hear sort of the path from where you were to where you are today.
Yeah. So my life, it's interesting. I like to tell people, especially when I encounter people that really want to have a conversation about maybe societal outlooks that are different than my own, because I've probably been in their position at some point along my life's journey. Yeah. I was raised in a very conservative Lutheran household. Catholic light was often how it was called. And I went to a parochial grade school from kindergarten through 8th grade. I still remember my 8th grade year, the church elders tried to convince my small class of 5 people that we should all go to the seminary and become pastors. And I don't know if they did that with every class, but that just kind of shows just how fundamental it was to my upbringing. And when I went to college, I went to a big university. Went to the University of Illinois, and it was my first time living outside of my small town. Where, at that time in the entire county, there was about 5 stoplights, and it's the second biggest county in Illinois. So that gives you a sense of just how rural it was. And so coming to university, I had already kind of reached a point with a lot of more conservative beliefs that I shouldn't be forcing my beliefs on other people, but also is in that space where I still remember explicitly in my Western Civ class was talking about how, if the Exodus had actually happened, that all the Egyptians' enemies would have written about it. Because even though they were known for erasing their history that they didn't like, their enemies would have talked about it. And so really started deconstructing a lot of the dogma. And for a long time, I still call myself Christian, just not really any church affiliation and the like. But over time, I've evolved to the point that if asked, put on the spot, I'll call myself a deist, but really it's a deist is basically almost a synonym for agnostic. And so, today, where I am with my life is still thinking about other people and caring about other people. And some of the things that really changed for that were, I mentioned the anti-racism workshop, but also I still remember during Me Too at the university, a female colleague of mine was trying to work through the system to report an incident that happened with her. And because I had been, those kinds of processes, rules, and things like that just stick with me for whatever reason. It's part of the reason why I'm a gamer, because rules just stick in my head. I knew how the process was supposed to work and what the channels were. And so I was helping her navigate those and supporting her. And she said, you're on all these university committees. I know you've met the chancellor, you've met the provost, you have all these different, relationships with people around the campus. You could actually be out there trying to make change the system, because the system was not working to support her. It gave her an outlet to maybe complain, but didn't give her an outlet to get justice. And it was hearing that from her, hearing her tell me that, you could actually be out here doing more, as like a little bit of ouch, but also a little bit of like, okay, just because something is called a women's issue or whatever you might label it, doesn't mean that white men don't have a place to be active in it. Doesn't mean we always have to be following. We want to be listening, but it doesn't have to mean we always follow behind and standing behind people that we're supporting. It means we also can use our power to do stuff too. And so I really, in the years since then, especially as allyship has become almost meaningless for, I think, a lot of people, especially people that would need allyship.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean by meaningless? Okay. Yeah.
So, because a lot of times people use allyship to be like, oh, I'm an ally. I believe in these things, that you deserve, to be treated better. You deserve better rights, all those kinds of things, or what happened to you was wrong. Like, that is a very passive allyship. And so when I talk about it, I actually talk about accompliceship. So instead of allies, we need accomplices that are going to work to tear down these systems, or go around these systems, or whatever it might be. Because, allyship, yes, it's better than being worse, to not caring about those things. But, really, allyship really lost, I think, its meaning when so many people started just using the adjective for themselves, or what they practiced or believed, really, without having the practice to go with it. And a lot of it kind of parallels where I got frustrated with, the church when I was in college, is that, it was a lot of just talk and not a lot of doing to actually make the world a better place. So,
yeah, I think often when something becomes mainstream, it becomes meaningless, and or at least it gets diluted.
Most definitely. And there's all sorts of examples of that around. And it's, it's not to say that everybody has to do something very active when it comes to, I'll stick with allyship since that's the word people know. It doesn't mean you have to be out there, protesting or volunteering at a nonprofit, or whatever the case may be. There's lots of different things that people can do, and sometimes it is just showing up at a protest. Sometimes it's volunteering to help fundraise with a small nonprofit that serves the BIPOC community in your area. Or maybe it's just like, when you pass through the farmer's market, like, hey, there's a Black owned business. I'm going to go shop with them rather than the vendor next door. Not because I have anything against the other one, but it's like, that's a very active step that people can take that is a little bit better than just calling yourself an ally.
So what did that look like for you in the workplace when, before you founded this nonprofit? Give me a couple examples of how allyship became this kind of accomplice type of thing. Yeah.
So when I heard this from my colleague, my first thought was like, okay, what am I going to do with it? Or what am I going to do with that feedback? And I thought, well, I'm on these different committees. I have these relationships around the campus. Like, what's maybe a step I could take? And I thought, well, there's one step I can take first, just to see what my voice sounds like in terms of, how it might be received, or almost like practicing before it's like higher stakes. And so at the time, and I believe that it still exists, there's a committee that represents university employees that aren't professors and aren't civil service staff. And I was like, this is a group I know that will care about this, because a lot of the things that were wrong with how things like sexual harassment and other things were being treated was because of the power dynamics between faculty and everybody else. And so I went to this group and I prepped, a statement just saying like, hey, we need to do better at this university. There are people that are quiet about, the work they do every day because they just want to keep their head down, because they've tried to, when they've done things that have been too successful, they might get harassed, they might get bullied, they might say, hey, you're stepping out of your lane, those kinds of things. And so, and from there, it became being involved with them to figure out, okay, how can academic employees work together to try to pressure the system. And it was actually around the same time that the university had put together a faculty committee to look at the issues and try to make improvements to university processes. And so when I happened to be on the Senate committee, the executive committee at the time as well. And so I was like, well, I've practiced my speech with my peers. It's time for me to put my neck out there in front of the chancellor and the provost and others. And when I was on the agenda, an update about what was going on, I said, all right, I'm going to say something here. And it meant saying like, hey, we can say we believe in all these principles. We can say that it's important to us to people feel safe in the workplace, feel respected in the workplace, feel equal in the workplace. But if it doesn't pan out or bear out in terms of how people are treated and how when the bad things that happen are not treated in ways that are just, we're not living up to those principles, and we can and should do better. And so, and the thing that I was, a little bit afraid of, it's like, well, I could maybe damage my career from this or in some way, but, I think afterwards, I can't remember if there was definitely, I won't just pick examples, but there were definitely powerful people in terms of, campus leadership that, talked to me afterwards and appreciated what I said. And, I was still able to get another job that was a step up from where I was. So it didn't hurt my career. And so I think to me, it was like, sometimes the system, even if you're a white man, the system will come back at you if you try to break down the system. But at least in that case, it showed me that like, no, I can safely do this and it's not going to hurt me in ways I don't want it to hurt me.
So let me ask you, I know that there's a lot of guys, and particularly white guys, who maybe feel like they're on the right side of history and want to help, but are kind of afraid to kind of step into this space for fear of saying the wrong thing. What would you say to a guy like that?
Well, so I think I could take your questions in two different ways, and I'll talk about maybe the way you meant the question, and I'll just talk about the way I want to talk about the question.
Okay.
So the way I think you meant the question is a little bit of people who are maybe afraid they're going to try to work and support the LGBT community, and they use the wrong language around talking about trans people, or maybe they're trying to work in some other space, some maybe a BIPOC space of some sort, and then they talk about immigrants in a way that maybe they still use the term illegal alien just because nobody's really told them ever to do something different. And what I always tell people is that in those kinds of situations, like, you're not a bad person for not having the right language to talk about things, because nobody's ever told you the right language, most likely. Where you get into a problem is if somebody tells you and corrects you on your language, is that if you get defensive about it, or if you refuse to listen and do better with it in the future, and it doesn't mean you're going to be perfect in the future, but at least you're trying to be better. That's where it's like, it's okay. Now there might be spaces where you still could get ostracized for that. And that's part of the baggage I think that we carry as white men in society, is that we maybe get less space to screw up, but that means like, okay, that's okay. It's not about me personally. It's about, the history that we exist in. But the other thing that I like to say to people, kind of the question I'll get to that I wanted to answer to that, is that I saw this when I started the organization that I did, is that there were a lot of people that I saw kind of reaching out to us, or, kind of in the spaces that we were working in, is that people, especially white people, were thinking they had the new original ideas to solve problems. And so they would start a new organization, and then eventually they had to find out like, oh, you should have done a little bit more homework, because there's been, this community of Black women or this immigrant community or whoever doing this work for decades already. And you could have just added to them. And now you've kind of, you've kind of made yourself try to look like a hero maybe, or white saviorism, but also, you could also just add resources to them and join in. And that's one of the ways in which I started the organization that I did, is that I went out and I asked people explicitly, should I be joining in with you, or do you think this should be its own thing? And it wasn't until I heard that multiple times, like it should be its own thing, before I decided it was time to do my own thing instead of just adding to what other people are doing. And so I tell people, if you think you want to contribute to trying to work on any number of these social justice issues going on around the country right now, is find people already doing the work, organizations already doing the work, reach out to them, tell them what your skills are, what you want to spend what you might be willing to spend your time doing. And if they say, we don't need that right now, write them a check and then go find another organization that asks the same question.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that. One of the themes that kind of runs through Illuminate is this idea of personal growth. And you earlier actually used the term that I tend to talk about in this idea of deconstruction, and that we learn all of these things, whether it's through our childhood, through our formative years, and even as adults, we learn things that we hold really tightly. And then at some point we learn something new, or that thing that we learned doesn't serve us anymore, but we have to deconstruct it. We have to take it apart and then relearn in that area. What would you say are the things that you really had to deconstruct, and like what was that process for like you? I mean, were there challenges in the process? Was it hard? Was it easy?
I think the one I already talked about religion, but originally, today I don't consider myself a religious person. So, but I still, maybe some of those principles I carry forward. Really, the thing that I think I've had to deconstruct the most is that, coming from a very traditional conservative kind of household, is that conflict was a bad thing. And that if you were upset about something, or you needed something, and my family my parents and my sister and I, we used to joke about how we were the drama-free part of the family, because we never fought, we never had arguments, all this kind of stuff. And I went through a number of romantic relationships, probably 2 or 3, in my post-college years in particular, where I was still feeling like, if we have one fight, that could be the end of the relationship, because people who quote unquote love each other don't, get into arguments, don't, have conflict. Yeah. And it was finally in one of those relationships where, I can't remember the specifics of an argument or something, but it was like, we're not breaking up over this. This is just a disagreement, and so, over time, I've gotten to a very much healthier place, at least in relationship with my wife, about how we have conflict, when we have conflict. I still struggle with identifying what my own needs are, because, typically my needs weren't listened to, or I wasn't asked what my needs were in different situations. And so it's something I continue to work on. But I think really that avoidance of conflict was something I've had to work hard, to get through. At the same time, I think, and this is maybe a little bit where some of my introvertedness comes through, is that like conflict, like being for healthy conflict, doesn't mean engaging in every possible conflict, because that is, you don't have the energy for that. Nobody has the energy for that. And so I'm also very careful about which conflict, I choose to engage with people that aren't close to me in my life. And so, I seek to have healthy conflict with my wife every time there's something that feels like it should be a conflict. It's like, in fact, earlier, this is a part of aging I don't like, is the random ways you seem to get hurt. So like, I don't know what I did in my foot, and my toes hurt. I don't know if I stubbed them on something, or I rolled the airplane tire across my foot and didn't realize, or what. But she accidentally kicked my foot, and I said, "Hey, my foot kind of hurts." And so, it was like, I need to be able to talk about that instead of just like sitting in pain and maybe scowling or something. And so, but with other people, if there's, if people do something annoying, and I've actually decided many years ago at this point, like, I don't engage in internet debate with people that aren't very close to me, because the energy is just not worth it for me. I'd rather put my energy other places. And it doesn't mean, again, going back to what I said earlier, that nobody should, because I'm glad there are people willing to do that work to try to have that conflict with people to help them learn. But at the same time, for my own energy, I have to pick and choose which conflict I'm going to have.
Yeah, that's honestly one of the hardest things in today's society because everything is so combative. And like there's so many places where you can have conflict with people and so many opportunities to disagree. And it's a really, I think it's a difficult thing to navigate for all human beings at this point.
Yep.
So what are the things you do to make sure that you're always learning? It sounds to me like you've gotten into this space where you really do like have this sort of default open mind, that you're always open to learning new things and sort of being informed by the world. But what are the things specifically that you do to make sure you're always learning?
This will sound funny because of how you and I know each other, the fact that feedback is so important to me, because for people listening, a workshop that Chris and I used to facilitate together, one of the pieces of content I would deliver in that workshop was about feedback, about giving and receiving feedback. Yeah. And what I find, there's two parts to it. One is, feedback is not, for a lot of people, it's not a very passive experience, in the sense that, especially as I've come to learn as the leader of an organization, like the executive in charge of the organization, is that people are intimidated by that no matter what kind of person you are. And it can be hard sometimes to get people to give you the feedback that you really want to hear, and the really important feedback. And that goes for whether it's, hey, this thing that you're doing is great, or this thing that you're doing needs to change because it's causing, this trouble, this, problem, whatever it might be. The other part with that, where I continue to work on growing with that, is that I think I've finally, maybe in the last several months, gotten to the place where I can much more quickly recognize when I'm being activated by a piece of feedback, as opposed to just a disagreement, maybe with a observation. Maybe there's like a factual thing that I maybe did have a disagreement on, but instead it's more of a activation. Like I feel like there's part of me, that's maybe feels hurt by that feedback. And if you can't recognize that feeling quickly, it's not going to end well for either that interaction or how that feedback's going to sit with you later.
How have you learned to manage that?
So it is very like we teach.
Or how are you learning to manage that? I should say.
We taught people in the workshop, like saying your response to feedback is thank you for the feedback. But I also I think it's it's a little bit of an inside joke to just say that. And what I say is also what I want to do, which is I really appreciate you sharing that with me. You've given me something to think about that is a little bit hard for me to think about right now, but I definitely want to think about that, and I might come back to you to get more from you. But I really appreciate that you shared that with me. And so really trying to make sure that, because when part of you is activated in that way, very often, part of how we know it's activation versus just maybe a disagreement or something, is that physiologically it does stuff to you. So I don't know for sure what things might be like. I've got this permanent crease on my forehead because I'm blue-eyed and, I squint everywhere I'm in sunlight. But from that, I think people sometimes just think I'm scowling all the time. And so, or whether it be maybe I turn a little bit red when somebody said something. And so those things, you can't control those things, no matter how measured you might make your verbal response. And so I think it's a little bit healthier to kind of do that. And then, really sit down and think about it later. And so I might journal about something later. I might talk to, a colleague, outside the organization or something like that, or somebody who's not connected to the person, just to really process it, not for them to give me advice necessarily, or unlikely, really more just about me processing, like, okay, and there's certainly been some things like, this is just one of the challenges of being an executive in an organization and the power dynamics that exist. And, it's something for me to be aware of, but maybe it's not something I can do anything about, because the power dynamics that exist in our society between your boss and an employee are just always going to be there.
Yeah. And I think it's, from my experience, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, as the sort of the executive of your organization, like the second you don't receive feedback well, it just, no one's going to give you feedback after that, right? If you have this sort of emotional reaction to something that triggers you, like you just have to do that once, and then everyone's going to be really wary around you.
Yeah, and the other part I found too, since leaving the university, I was similar, smaller scale than where you're at, but also very similar in terms of leading a team and at a being upper management and within a college at a larger university, is that at the university, it was really easy to say like, well, I'm really sorry, but that's out of my control. I'll lobby for change where I can, but so many things were out of my control. But when you're the executive and the founder and a member of the board, a lot of things are in your control. And so, it's really then thinking about like, okay, now I can't just, hopefully I wasn't using that as a cop out before, but certainly it was the reality for where we worked. And so, now I'm very careful, again, thinking about that, power dynamic that exists and those kinds of things. Like, what do I have within my power to make a difference, and what kind of precedent am I setting for the future? And both in terms of the organization, but also for the relationship with that person, kind of like you're talking about with the feedback that people won't come again if you respond to it poorly. And so I think just all those things together make it both much more challenging, but also much more gratifying, because you can listen to people and give them what they need.
Yeah. The buck stops there, but you can actually do something with the buck, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's shift a little bit and talk about community. You talked early, like about your motivation and about like doing things for others and kind of being supportive and doing things for your wife. But where do you get support? Who do you rely on, or what do you rely on for support in your own life?
So it's a complex thing. And so, support can come from a lot of different places. So there's certainly some things that I talk to my wife about, for things, but there's also part of some of the things with my work are very triggering for her. And so, can bring up different things for her. And so I can't go to her with everything. And so I have old work colleagues that I can talk to about some things, including yourself. I also have, I do talk to a therapist on occasion just to have a sounding board to kind of work through things and think about that stuff. It is, one of the things that's unfortunately changed for me in the last, or really since the pandemic, is that, I mentioned in the introduction for me, is that, gaming has been part of my life since I've been, a kid. And a lot of that, because of obviously during the pandemic, in-person gaming, getting around a table with a bunch of friends, just didn't happen, during the pandemic. And so a lot of those structures have kind of fallen away, but also, it's the hard part of, I think, being a more emotionally connected, man, and being, really thinking about like, what does it mean to be a man in today's society, is that there's still lots of men that we might love being around, but like, it's about sports. It's about the weather. It's about, as I call them, kind of superficial things. And it doesn't mean there's no value to those relationships. Yeah. It just means that like, you're maybe holding part of yourself back, and that's hard. And so, if there's been times, maybe where I felt that like, oh, I really wish I could talk to this person about this thing, but I'm also not sure I'm ready for that, what that might do with the relationship. And so it's like, well, that means I got to find somebody to talk about it if I can't talk about it in this situation. So it's definitely an area that I need to do better with.
You mentioned the gaming community. And has that sort of revitalized itself at all, or where else do you find or create community?
So as a pilot, that's probably where I find community most often. The kind of the running joke that I tell people, there's two things that pilots like to do. One is to fly, and the other is to talk about flying. And so there's also another joke of, how do you know if somebody's a pilot? They'll tell you. And so, there's a number of aviation groups I'm a part of, physically in the local community, but there's also, as much as I try to avoid most of Facebook, the parts of Facebook that are still like more community groups type stuff, like those places. I have other online, friends and the like that, I still get together with, but also one of the nice things with, the work that I do, being a form of activism, is that there are a lot of people both locally that I can talk to that are activists, either in similar issues or adjacent issues, but also, I dabbled in Signal before this work, and now it is the bulk of where communication takes place for the work that I do. And so it's like, if I got something on my mind, I've probably got some Signal group that I'm in, whether it be one person, or whether it be with, oh yeah, I remember running into somebody at this conference and we talked about this thing. I should tell them this thing that I'm thinking about, or this thing that I'm feeling, and see what they think. And so it's, I think people sometimes get locked in too much on community, meaning like there's just one, like you have just one community. And I think, you get this, there's the old book Tribes. I don't know if you ever read that book. Tribes is back in the early days of like Web 2.0, is that, talked about how, tribes, people gather in different ways around different purposes. And I think it's similar to how we might have mentors and coaches for different purposes. We also have communities of different types and different purposes that, we can lean on, or we can go to, whether it be just an entertainment thing, or whether it be for just sharing a common cause or whatever it might be. And so, it's really, I think, important for identifying what those communities are for you and engaging with them in ways that are superficial when they have to be, or superficial when they're just entertainment for joy or whatever it might be, but also when they can be something more than that.
Yeah. So I always ask about male friendship with the men that I have on this show. And I think I'm going to change that up just a little bit with you, because you sort of hinted at this, that maybe your friendship with other men can be kind of superficial. I had a previous guest, Jason Lang, who described triangulation, where guys won't connect with each other, but they'll connect over something else, like the third point of the triangle, whether it's sports or the weather, as you said. Give me a description of what like ideal male friendship would be for you. Like if it was the way you wanted it to be, what would it look like?
I think probably the biggest thing would be to be vulnerable, like to be like, hey, this thing scares me, or this thing makes me sad. And because so much of what, Bell Hook's Will to Change talked about this a lot, which is that, boys and men, we're taught by society, both from how we're brought up within many families, but also by media and other things that surround us, is that the one emotion men are allowed to show is anger. And so, I think really to have that, and probably the others I think we're also allowed to show maybe sometime today is where we find that community is like around joy. So it's, cheering on the same sports team, or, that kind of a thing, or enjoying the same hobby, whatever it might be, like that.
Joy and anger are sort of the weird couple around sports, right?
Yeah. Or frustration if you're a Cubs fan, or,
exactly.
But I think, that vulnerability is in this particular case, I mean like fear, sadness, and with some of my work, I do, or with the work that I do every day, with this administration, I do worry that I could get arrested, even though I'm not doing anything illegal, from my perspective, or that I could get disappeared. And, I've tried to like broach that with some men friends, and sometimes they'll just kind of blow it off like, yeah, whatever, that's never going to happen. And sometimes it'll be like, if it were any other time, I'd tell you were crazy, but you are not crazy to feel that way. And sometimes they move on to another topic, because I don't know if it's because they are uncomfortable talking about it, but sometimes it's like, well, then they want to hear more about what things maybe are, to give me a chance to process and think about it. So I think that's really what I would say to that.
Well, I think I would offer that it probably scares them to think that you could actually be victimized like that.
Yeah.
Right. And it's hard to sort of even fathom, like 5-10 years ago, like that would have seemed like a really ridiculous thing in our society, like nearly impossible. So I think all of us are sort of like trying to rationalize, like, is this real? Is it like, what is the threat level right now? You and I and a third friend of ours, like we talk about DEF CON a lot, and like, where are we at the DEF CON? And it's, that's changing really rapidly in today's society.
Yeah. And it's much more apparent now, I think, to more people. But I think I mentioned earlier how, systems of white supremacy, the patriarchy, a Christian hegemony, all these different things about, American society, have always, for anybody who tries to break down those systems, whether at a big scale or at a smaller one, the system fights back. And, this is how the system is fighting back right now. But also even before right now, I know a pilot who had we have to go as pilots, we had to get a medical exam, depending on what kind of flying you do. You have to do it either every 5 years or every 6 months. And the doctor who was doing his examination became aware of his political beliefs and basically issued a report that meant that he couldn't fly for 2 years. And he was an airline pilot. So he was basically not unemployed, but couldn't do airline flying for almost 2 years. Thankfully, he was able to find at least a little bit of other work, and his wife had a good job. But at the same time, the system saw what he was doing and it struck back at him.
Oh, but I'm not even sure what to say about that. That's beyond unfortunate.
So I think
it
is wrong. And I think that's where we as men need to be able to talk to about things that, are maybe not even just about sadness or fear, but it's also about what's not right. And I think we all have felt at times oh, I really wish I had said something differently in XYZ situation, because it was a missed opportunity maybe to help somebody learn, or at least to speak up and say, what you just said was not right. And I don't think, it's just to feel that way or fair to believe that way or good to feel that way, whatever it might be. There's of course, gentler and more direct ways maybe sometimes to do those things. Yeah. But that's how we have to do it.
There's so many opportunities to sort of correct, throughout every single day, the average day, there are so many opportunities to go, hey, you could have done that better. Right. There's a better way of doing that. But I think there's this tendency, and I do this all the time. Oh, okay, I'm not going to die on that hill today. Because eventually people go, oh, that's the boy who cried wolf at every little thing. And so it's really, I think it's difficult, but it's important to figure out how do we do that? How do we do that effectively so that people don't tune us out? But yet we're making a difference in the world.
Yeah, I was at you saying that is reminding me of a particular time. I was at a poker tournament at American Legion Lodge, and I was in line to get a drink. There's a guy behind me, and then one of my employees who was also playing in the tournament, one of my staff was a couple people behind me, and the guy behind me made this offhand comment of it's really nice to see there's not very many black people here. I'm like, I talked with the guy who worked for me later. He's like, oh shit, Mike's going to get in a fight. and actually that's kind of what went through my head. Do I want to get into a physical fight? Because this is the American Legion. Yeah. This guy was talking about being a veteran. It's well, we know whose side, this fight is going to end up on. So, there is certainly choosing the right times and stuff. And I don't consider myself weak for not saying something there. I'm really glad I didn't tell that guy, thank you for your service. I think that phrase is kind of empty anyway, but I'm also really glad I didn't say it to him in particular. That said, being in the military could be part of why he, turned him into that, kind of indoctrinated him into thinking that way. But I think too, we can beat ourselves up a lot over what I could have said or what I should have said. And I have tried multiple different approaches for engaging with people on these different topics. And whether it be just asking questions well, why do you say that? Or what do you mean by that? To, they made a factual point. It's well, offer a counterfactual point. And there is no predicting about how that engagement will go. And so, it may not be dying on that hill, but also might just be really frustrating because it's just the other person's not going to listen to you, and you're probably not listening to them really either, because they're not really maybe saying what's behind with their statements and stuff. And so I think it's good to, ask ourselves hey, why didn't I speak up there? But also, it's okay to not speak up every time.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's an opportunity, even if you don't speak up in the moment, to reflect on it, prepare yourself for the next time, or even follow up with somebody after the fact.
Yeah.
when it's a more de-escalated situation.
Yeah. And it's also, especially if there's, somebody says something homophobic, transphobic, racist or whatever, especially if there's somebody, that is from that group, especially checking in with them like after, like, hey, I'm sorry I didn't say anything. I just want to check in. Are you okay? Do you need anything from me?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch to our lightning round.
Okay.
11 questions intended to be quick answers. I might ask you to dive in a little deeper if something piques my interest as we're going through this. But first question, what are your top 3 values?
So first I would say is listening, which means not forcing myself into spaces, is listening, first and often. Taking people's needs at their stated face value. So if somebody says they need something, it's like believing them when they say that's their need. And third, I would say, to be more straightforward, maybe with the third one, is just integrity.
Okay. Who is one role model you've had in your life?
I think, it's both, I think, a crime to say this, but also like, I think it's accurate, is that in my 20-year career at the university, I had a man for a boss exactly for 1 year of that 20 years. And I think I learned so much from every single one of those women who was my boss during that time, that all of them are baked into the leader and manager that I am today. And whether it be Leslie Miller, who was in charge of the Office of Technology Management, whether it be the dean from College of Applied Health Sciences, or the former dean of media. Just so many different women that, did things for me and demonstrated to me what it meant to like care about people as a boss and, make it about them and not about like what was the expectations of work all the time.
Yeah. Who do you hope you're a role model for?
I think I would say that white people, especially men, white men, to really for them to see, that we are both victims of and creators of the world that we live in.
Dive into that a little bit. I want to hear the elevator pitch on like what you mean by that, especially the victim side.
Well, so, we don't, like I kind of alluded to earlier, we aren't, we don't come up with as men on our own that our only emotions can be anger and then maybe joy, are our 2 emotions that we get to show. We're taught that by our fathers. We're taught that by our mothers. We're taught that by the culture, and I don't mean here just pop culture. It's, books and, music, everything that, shows us that it's those things. And so that's where, like, it's one of those things where like I don't have the energy for it. I don't think, because I just don't know that I can. But where we can't abandon men to say like, the world is the way it is because you did it. You made it this way in terms of a population. But this, so you got to fix yourself. Like it's needs people out there, trying to help men grow and evolve, because otherwise things aren't going to change. But it also means, like, as an example, a single mother that I know that has a son, a very young son. After I read Bell Hooks's, Will to Change, I was like, hey, I know you're really progressive and, you're raising a son on your own and his father is basically out of his life. I read this book, and I think you're going to be a lot of things. You're going to be like, oh yeah, I totally get that. And there's others that be like, oh man, I should really think about like how I engage, with my son, because even though I'm a mother, it can affect the things I do are influenced by the patriarchy or by white supremacy or all those things that exist out there.
Yeah, I actually want to comment on that, because I think that's sort of one of the core reasons why I started this podcast. Is I think men aren't given the tools when they're younger to truly operate as whole humans in 2025 or 2024. In our modern society, it's criminal the way that we raise boys in this country, and maybe in the world. This is not a U.S. specific thing, although I think we have a particularly toxic brew of it in the United States, and we just have to do something about it. Like we're not going to solve these big problems in society until we figure out how to raise boys better.
Yeah. And it's, I think maybe that's the thing too, with like we can do in our relationships with men, especially when we're trying to have deeper relationships with other men, is like giving each other space to grow too. It's like, when you finally get to maybe some of these topics, like maybe one of your really close friends turns out to have some kind of racist ideas or, other bigoted ideas. And it doesn't mean immediately cutting them out of their life. Now, if they're not willing to listen and change and grow, then sure, it might be needed to maybe cut them out of your life. But at the same time, if all they ever experience is being cut out of people's lives because of those kind of beliefs or toxic behaviors, then they're never going to grow. And there are certainly some that will never grow just because from their own choices too. And so it's, but at the same time, when we have to try to be better.
Yeah. What's the one way you make the world a better place for others?
I could cheat and just say the nonprofit that I started, but since we aren't talking about the details of it because of the security sensitivities of it, I'll say that one of the things I really enjoy doing as a pilot is giving free rides to kids, especially kids from communities that don't look like you and me, because the pilot population is predominantly white and about 93% men, and that's not an exaggeration. It's single digits about how many women are pilots. And so when people come from other backgrounds and kids come from other backgrounds, like those are the ones I savor, because they probably don't know another pilot. Like the chances are almost zero, just because of those stats. And so giving them a chance to experience aviation, I love it.
That's super cool. I love that idea. What's the hardest thing about being you in today's world?
Not sitting in anger and frustration that we've regressed as a nation. And, it's hard to really sit with that and acknowledge it and feel those feelings. And then my next feeling is often like, all right, what am I going to do about it?
Gotta get up out of your seat. That's the only way to deal with that, I think. What's your favorite emotion?
Playful, definitely playful. I like to have fun.
What's your least favorite emotion?
I will say blank, because going to, a lot of how I was raised is that like my needs I wasn't asked what my needs were or things like that, is that I tend to bury my emotions. And so when I say blank, I don't mean like I'm not feeling an emotion. Is like, it's not just not feeling an emotion, but is there an emotion that is there, but I'm just burying it and ignoring it. And so that is definitely one that is it's my least favorite one, is, it's just being blank.
Okay. What brings you the most joy in life?
Flying a little yellow plane 500 feet off the ground at 70 miles per hour, watching the ground go by.
Does that scare you ever?
Oh yeah, there's times it's scary.
Is that part of the joy?
No, it's not part of the joy. I mean, it's in the moment, it's never the joy. Afterwards, it can be like, it's either one, that was a really stupid decision, but usually it's just more like, okay, yeah, I put my skills to work there. Like today, it's really gusty, windy today. I went flying earlier, and this little yellow plane, it's very light. And so you feel every little gust, every little bump of turbulence. And there were definitely, a few times where I was just going along for a ride. I was not flying, and it wasn't, it didn't turn me upside down or anything like that, or get to a point that was really dangerous. But it was like, I'm basically just trying to maintain a certain attitude of the airplane as opposed to making it go where I want it to go.
I think the only parallel I have in my life was the first time I tried skiing. I ended up on an expert hill without the knowledge of it being an expert hill, and it was completely terrifying.
Yeah, the thing about flying, there's a lot of things that hold over from sailing and seafaring that come into aviation, and so like even how air behaves is very much like water. So you look at whitewater rapids, you can see what the water is doing. In the air, you can't see, other than clouds and the shapes they might have, you can't see the air doing that. And so that's what makes it a little bit more intimidating from the bumps and the rolls.
Yeah. What makes you most proud of yourself?
That I never have stopped learning and growing.
Where can you feel the most yourself?
The introverted part of me wants to be by myself, say by myself, doing whatever it is that I want with, not having to do anything that other people expect of me. But I think, I would say when I'm amongst LGBTQ plus pilots, I was at a conference earlier this year for LGBT pilots, and I was like, I can say whatever I believe here. I feel like these are my people. These are my people.
What's the one thing that you hope people take away from this conversation?
So much of what we experience or believe as men today is because of what society has told us to do in terms of behaviors or to believe. And we can choose to ignore that, or we can really dig into it and really dig into who we are, figure out who we are and what our relationship is with ourselves, with our loved ones, with society around us. And that it's only through engaging with other people that aren't like us, but also people who are like us, and just really seeing where that takes us in terms of what we can learn.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the conversation today, Mike. I'll leave us with the same thing that I tell every one of my guests is keep up the hard work.
Thank you.
You can learn more about Illuminate at illuminate.substack.com. We are also streaming on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and YouTube. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you at the next episode of Illuminate.